Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We have some special guests. Some special guests joining us this morning. We have Laphonza Butler. Did I say that right?
You did.
And Alexis Johnson. Did I say that right?
Alexis McGill Johnson.
Alexis McGill Johnson. Welcome from Planned Parenthood and Emily's List. Welcome.
Thank you.
So let's talk about what Emily's List is
I was going to say the same thing. What is
so,
Emily's List?
So
Yes.
that people know, because you are the first Black woman to actually be the president of Emily's List.
I am. And I think the most important thing, sort of first off, is that Emily is actually not a person. It's an acronym, and it stands for early money is like yeast. It makes the dough rise. What we do is we work to help Democratic pro-choice women get elected to office all across the country, up and down the ballot, and making sure that they have the resources early in their campaigns to be taken seriously, and to continue to get more support and more endorsements and investments in their campaign. And so we've been an organization that has been created since 1985. And I am the first Black woman and first mom to lead Emily's List.
Hey, congratulations. Alexis, do you want to talk about Planned Parenthood? You want to clear up any misconceptions? Because Planned Parenthood has been in the news lately.
Yes, indeed. Look, Planned Parenthood continues to be the largest provider of sexual and reproductive health care across this country. We are, we provide everything, right, from birth control, family planning, STI testing, to abortions where we can, in states where we can. And we are oftentimes the first point of entry for many of our communities into the healthcare system, and so we continue to do that.
And I don't even want to repeat these kind of conspiracy theories, but it's good for y'all to be on this platform to really give the real information. Kanye West, he was on Drink Champs, and he claimed that Planned Parenthood conspired with the KKK to control the Black population.
Well, that is not true. And look, I mean, I don't want to. We have this fight with Kanye, I think, every other year on the reality. But you know what I mean? Really, like I said, Planned Parenthood has been serving communities, providing care in our communities for over 100 years.
And not just abortions.
Yeah, more
That's
than
a
just
small
abortions.
Way more than
of what
abortions.
Planned
That's what I
Parenthood
said. Birth control, STI testing, health care. I mean, basic health care, primary care in many communities. And we are all across the country. And look, what I say to Kanye, what I say to all the other haters, right, is I trust women, I trust Black women to make their decisions about their own bodies.
And that's the thing, right? Like, I think it was Fox News. He said that. He probably been saying that all over the place. I don't remember. But he also said that, when they asked him to come visit the Holocaust Museum, he said, "Let's go visit my Holocaust Museum," which is Planned Parenthood. And I'm like, well, people made choices to have abortions. That's the difference.
Planning. I know what I want to do.
Like nobody made a choice to die in the Holocaust.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, I can't keep fighting with Kanye, right? I mean, I think that he is,
Now, let me ask you about overturning Roe versus Wade. How has that affected Planned Parenthood? Because I know people always affiliate that, freedom of choice, and then they try to shut down Planned Parenthoods in different states. How has Planned Parenthood's numbers been affected as far as locations that are still existing?
Look, I mean, the majority of work that we do is provide access to family planning and all these other tests, right? So, Planned Parenthood continues to stay in community. But really the impact isn't on Planned Parenthood, it's on the patients, right? We are seeing people travel 400 miles one way on average, getting in a car, driving 11 hours, taking half of their medication abortion pills in the state where it's legal, and then self-managing themselves on the way back home.
That's dangerous.
It's dangerous. It's horrific, and it's brutal. It's a burden that we are putting on people traveling. So that's where my concern is right now. What's happening to providers, what's happening to the criminalization, right? The fear that people have when they're traveling. They're worried about getting pulled over. Coming back into the state, because many of these leaders have talked about, trying to ban getting out of state. They're literally saying the states will hold them hostage. Like, that's the kind of
Even
stuff
if you help somebody get
Even
access,
if you give them
that's
information.
criminal.
Yeah. Universities don't want to give students information about how to get out of state. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I think we need to be really vigilant about because of the surveillance and the criminalization.
I was going to ask if there's any change of possibly changing facilities, right? A lot of times when you drive by a Planned Parenthood, you see people protesting and they have the huge whatever out there and these signs, and it has to be hard for somebody who's already making a difficult decision in most cases. But now I have to face that on my way in or on the way out. Have you guys thought about possibly changing some of that so people wouldn't have to deal with that?
Well, I mean, the right to protest is, right under the Constitution. And so, what we can do is provide security. We make sure that our patients come in. But, we have to be clear, this is also about stigma and shaming. That is one of the strategies. Misinformation, stigma, shaming. Those are all the ways that people try to intimidate folks trying to get access to care.
Now, Laphonza, with elections coming up, I wanted to talk to you about this being a topic that's on the ballot, the right of freedom to choice, right? And so I keep seeing on the news that this is not something that's driving people. They're more concerned about the rise in crime and the economy. So what are your thoughts from what you've been seeing as far as people voting? Because I feel like we need to make sure that people are still knowing that that is an issue that's on the ballot.
Look, I think it's clear. It's one of the fundamental freedoms that are on the ballot this November. And every poll taken since the passage of Roe has shown that the majority of the American people support having access to abortion care and reproductive services. Just yesterday or just over the weekend, Gallup poll showed 44% of respondents saying that abortion was an extremely important issue for which they were preparing to vote in less than a week to go. And so, look, I think that it is important for listeners to appreciate that our reproductive freedom, our ability to make choices about our own body, is as essential to the demonstration of our democracy as it is to go and vote. And in my opinion, those two things are inextricably linked. Our ancestors have fought for not just the right to vote, but Black women had never had control over our bodies. We were told when we were going to have children. We were told when we were going to have children, whose child we were going to have.
Right.
And now that we have fought and many died for not only the right to vote, but the right to make decisions about our own bodies. It's that bodily autonomy. It is that fundamental freedom that I think we've got to go vote for this November and send a loud and clear message that we are in control of our own bodies and our own future, and we're going to only elect those who support that majority will.
But it's interesting, right? Because we say that, but then, you have somebody like President Obama who sat down with Planned Parenthood and told Planned Parenthood this was a priority for him. He was going to codify Roe v. Wade when he got in, but then when he got in, he said it wasn't high up on his list of priorities. So what do y'all think about that?
I mean, look, I think we were all lulled into a false sense of security because we had Roe v. Wade, right? We didn't need to codify it when we actually had Roe be the law of the land, and every single candidate for the Supreme Court said that they would follow precedent, right? I mean, on the record, they clearly lied about it, and they, with quickness overturned Roe. But I think that, the opportunity we have now, if we get to 52 senators, we have a president that we can hold to the fire around this. He said he's willing to get rid of the filibuster. He said that codifying Roe would be his first act of business, and the John Lewis voting bill would be the second, right?
I believe it when I see it.
I hear you on it. The only other thing that I would add to Alexis's point is that President Obama actually never had a pro-choice Democratic Congress. He had a majority Democratic Congress.
It's always the problem.
But every Democrat is
right.
not that we elect has not
Mm-hmm.
been pro-choice. And so I think that adding these lenses to how we view candidates is incredibly important. And sure, President Obama fell short, and the folks that we elected were not standing in lockstep with the American people, and I think that's important.
I agree.
I was going to ask, sometimes you see these politicians that say they're pro-life, right?
Like Herschel Walker.
And then you dig into their background, and that you see that they visited Planned Parenthood a couple of times. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts when you hear that from different politicians and senators?
I mean, the hypocrisy is real, right? I mean, you look at the Walker race right now, and the fact that a second accuser now has come out saying that he demanded that she get an abortion. It's I think it's just hypocritical, right? I think that the Republican Party says that they stand for all these values. They say they stand for pro-life, and literally the same states that they are putting all these abortion laws in are the same states that have the highest maternal mortality rate for Black women. So it doesn't jive, right, in the right way, and I think that people they see it, but I think they're voting for power, right?
That's right.
It's like disqualifying.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
You know, we all have these reasons why we think, you know, there was such a push to end abortion rights. Why do y'all think there was such a push to end abortion rights?
I think Alexis just called it out, right? This is about power. This isn't about policy. This is a party that is in absolute pursuit of control of this country. And I think control of the country means control over not only who you vote, where you vote, but then who is born and who lives and who gets the resources that they need for their communities and their children to thrive. And I think we can't disconnect voting from power. This is about power building, and that is what they are ultimately after, in my opinion.
Who has the, go ahead.
I was going to say, even if you think about Black women in our bodies and how, even with hysterectomies, a lot of times you go to the doctor and they're like, oh, you have to have a hysterectomy, and you don't know any better, and then you end up having a hysterectomy, and that's taking away some power over your body. And like you said, the mortality rate for Black women higher in all of these places than for any other race of women. And so now being told that you have to, like you said, travel, and I see some corporations are providing transportation, but now you have to go to your job and tell them something that you might rather be intimate for yourself and not have to let your job know is happening. And so that means, you know, time off from work. That means you have to travel somewhere. And I also feel like it is important for us with these corporations that we shop with or that we support. What's their stance, right, when it comes to women and the right to choose? What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's critically important that corporations, what they've done for their workforce, they need to do for their consumers and their communities. And the way they need to do that is to actually, you know, kind of stop the lifeblood of giving all the corporate money to these same lawmakers that are making these things. They're giving them money, they're empowering them, and these lawmakers have no accountability to their constituents. They don't have to be, because they've created the rules. They've gerrymandered all their districts so that they can take these votes out of and be out of sync with the people who live in their states. And, you know, what Laphonza is talking about in terms of the sync between voting rights and reproductive rights is the fact that, you know, between this election and the next election, like literally we're looking at the possibility of the end of democracy. They will have controlled all of these spaces. And, you know, if we don't actually turn out and show up in this election and next election, that's going to be a wrap.
I mean, I just look at every state that has introduced voting rights constraints, introduced reproductive rights constraints. And, you know, we talk a lot about Texas and look at the bill numbers. I mean, SB 8 was abortion rights. SB 1 was voting rights. And that is the same in Florida. It is the same in Georgia. It is the same in Oklahoma. This is fundamentally, Charlamagne, to your earlier point, about power. This is about 270 electoral college votes. It is about having the power to gerrymander districts to make sure that they always have the majority in Congress, and ensuring that they have the majority in Congress, by ensuring that they have 270 electoral votes. Then they have these sort of distracting conversations about policy to make sure that we, people who share the opinion of reproductive freedom, that we just leave the state of Texas, or we just don't even go to the state of Texas. We'll just go to California or New York or Illinois, so they don't even have to worry about us voting in Senate elections. They've now, with that methodology, controlled every level of government that will make national decisions about our fundamental freedoms and whether or not this is going to be a democracy for generations to come. And I think Alexis has just named it, right? Like, we have 4 years to fight for this thing that I think my daughter deserves, and I think that all of America's children deserve. And we are leaning in. We are absolutely leaning in to do that, and absolutely our sons as well.
I've been saying for the past 2 years, the death of democracy is upon us, and the midterms is going to be that marking point. But it scares me, right? Because it's like, we have these people in positions of power now, and I don't personally feel like they're doing enough to protect us. I feel like Republicans are always on the offense, and Democrats have zero defense to prevent that. So I'm a vote, but I don't have any hope, to be honest with you.
Well, and Vice President Kamala Harris, this has been, a strong stance for her, but I also feel like it's been not amplified enough. What do you think can be done, to the point of Republicans are so aggressive and very much on the offense? What can President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris be doing better?
I mean, being out there, I think you're right. I mean, she has been tireless. Let me tell you, she has been all over the country. She's been meeting with state legislatures, with providers, with patients, hearing their stories. We have been in the rooms with her. Let me tell you, she is really good. She is really good in those conversations, talking about, helping people connect the dots. And again, I feel like Laphonza and I are on the same page all the time around voting, repro, all of these education bills, everything. She is seamless in connecting the dots there. I think the limitation, right, is that they need a Congress to work with, right? And the same critique of Obama. They need a Congress that actually works. And, we don't have a pro-choice Senate majority. That's the problem, right?
Yep.
We got somebody in there who's holding all the cards. That's why we need to get to 52.
Joe Manchin.
Yes.
You got to say his name.
Yes.
Kristen Sinema. You got to say their name.
We got to get
That's what they don't do. You have to call them out,
right,
shame
exactly.
them.
Yes, Joe Manchin.
That's a good name for the hell.
That was a Freudian slip if I ever heard one.
Joe Cinema. Get rid of them both. All their altars.
I also want to know, people always ask, how can they help, right? And how do you, whether it's financially, whether it's just showing up, how can you break down how people can help enjoying what you guys are doing?
I think it's one of the things that I always get asked, because I think you're right, Charlamagne. People have gotten hopeless, and I sort of refer to it as being sort of distracted by our despair. And I think we started to ask ourselves, what can I do to have the most impact, or
Correct.
What can I do to create the biggest change? And I just sort of say to my friends that I grew up with in Mississippi, don't try to have the most change. Just do something. Do one thing. If you can do one thing, two things, five things, but just do something. It is the collective action of all of us that actually are going to have the biggest change, create the most impact. And so what I always suggest to folks is find an organization that you care about and dedicate yourself to it. Don't just do this is the election, so I'm just going to give to this person, or I'm going to give to this organization. Or it's hard for organizations to plan that way when they don't know if you're going to come back next year as a donor. But find an organization and say, I'm going to give $5 every month from, come hell or high water till the time that I'm done, or I find a new organization that's going to help to amplify what I care about. But find one organization and be dedicated to it. The other is that, we all have the opportunity to go and vote. Even in our despair, we have the responsibility to go and make sure that our voice is heard and our vote is cast. And then last thing that I will say, after spending 20 years in the labor movement, find somebody else to go with you. It's your one, but it's your one plus the 5 friends that you chop it up with every single day. Let's just go make sure that we are taking care of our own sphere of influence and choosing to do one thing that can make a bigger difference.
Question, and once again, I'm going back to some of the stuff that was spewed the past couple of weeks, but 50% of black deaths a year, they're not abortions, right?
No.
Okay. That was a stat that he put out there.
What you talking about?
That was a stat he actually put out there. He said that 50% of, and by he, I mean Kanye, 50% of black deaths a year are abortion.
No, that is not correct.
Have you ever thought about suing him for some of the things that he put out that weren't true about your organization?
Defamation.
I mean, here's the thing. With all due respect, I think the man is having, been living in a public breakdown for the last few years.
I agree.
And, and a lot of stuff that's coming out of his mouth is absolutely insane. It's offensive. It's racist. It's anti-Semitic. It's just
anti-black.
Anti-black. It is just all wrong, right? And I think we give him too much oxygen, right? I think we need to dispel. I mean, I'm concerned about the impact, quite frankly, that he's having, particularly on black men. And we're, and I think it's right to correct the misinformation, but, I mean, he's exhausting.
Yeah, what is the stat? Is there even a number?
No, there's not a number like that. I mean, I think that the majority of people who access abortion are already parents. They're people who are making decisions about whether or not it is the right time to expand their family or say the family is as it is, right?
Envy and I just had that conversation the other day, right? Where did he go? Oh. Why are you over here? Remember, I was telling you a lot of times there's this misconception of who is actually
having abortions.
having abortions, and a lot of times it is women who are like, all right, I already have 3 kids.
I'm good.
You know, we're not ready to have another one. This wasn't something that was planned, and with whatever you decide you want to do with your family, you can make that decision and that choice.
And to that point, and like there's also women who are getting pregnant, who want to have a child, who for whatever reason are having the medical difficulties, and need to have an abortion to save their own life.
Their own life, correct?
Their own life. We get sort of. I think there's much more attention being paid to the stories of that frankly have been happening all the time.
Right.
But that are getting a lot more exposure for people to learn about what it is like to be a woman carrying a child with these kinds of physical ailments or medical conditions. I think all of us have learned more about ectopic pregnancies in this conversation than we ever thought we wanted to know. It is dangerous to carry a child. And while incredibly, an incredible blessing, it can be incredibly dangerous for a woman's body. And to say that, any elected official, call it Joe Cinema, should be in that doctor's office, should be in that doctor's office. Right. I think it's just an insult to the person who's having that child and who has to make that difficult decision, whose body is going through so much trauma. And let's not forget the mental anguish, the mental health that is associated with making some of these decisions, making the decision to have an abortion. It's just like, what are we really talking about here? Like, why do we need Joe Cinema? And I'm sort of going with Alexis's surname here, but it's like
every time they vote against something, that's what I'm saying. They want Joe Cinema.
Like, let's get Joe Cinema to invest in mental health services for and access across the country. Let's get Joe Cinema to invest in more rural clinics in communities across the country. And then we can really talk about whether you're pro-life or not.
Yeah, and the other thing is that I feel like women who have money and families with money, they'll be able to still
always
go to a private doctor, to travel somewhere and get an abortion if they need to, if they make that decision, and come back home. And they'll have way more access. It'll just be a lot harder for people who just don't have that ability to be able to do that financially.
And that's what we're seeing right now, right? You see the people who like literally are leaving at the end of their shift and getting in a car and driving 11 hours, and then there are people who are just flying, to San Francisco for the weekend.
Or doing something unsafe.
Right. Well, yes. I mean, I do think that self-managed abortions are safe and they...
Well, no, I mean even other extreme things.
Understood. Yeah. I think that we have more information and more insight, and I do think that our hope is that we continue to provide that information so people can make decisions and get the care that they need, however they need to in the states where they are. And at the same time, we know that not everybody will have that access. And a lot of people are going to be forced into pregnancy, right? And I think that there is also anguish in, not being able to make that decision for yourself in that way, too. And so I think to Laphonza's point, it is critical that we hold particularly these folks in these states that are rushing to make these bans accountable for all of the other kind of medical and health services they need to provide. These are the same states that have not expanded access to Medicaid or to under the Affordable Care Act, right? So they're not even providing the basic level of health care. They're denying themselves, their residents, billions of dollars in access to health care. And so those are the conversations that we also need to start sparking, particularly as we go into this next state legislative cycle.
What do you say to people who question Planned Parenthood because of like the origins of Planned Parenthood with like Margaret Sanger? Like that's somebody that they always like to bring up.
They do. And you know what? I brought it up last year. I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. I called her the original Karen because, at least Karen's godmother, because, I think that, she did have some questionable thinking and practices, and I think we need to name that. She was aligned with the eugenics movement. She was aligned with and she was aligned with a lot of other people like Du Bois and Martin Luther King, right? And so it's not a neat history, but any organization that's over 100 years ago is steeped in white supremacy in some way. And, my job is to, help eradicate that. That is the work that we need to be doing over and over again. And so I would say to people who ask that question, was not the intent. The intent was around birth control as a liberating force for all women. She did speak to Black women and white women, and she did speak to the KKK auxiliary, and I think that's history. And at the same time, the organization that it is today
has evolved
and under much different leadership. And I think that's where I put my name and my record on.
I think what's happening now is a lot of decolonization of these historical institutions, and I don't think people they don't know the change is happening because they just know what it stood for originally.
What it used to be.
Right. But like 1 in 4 people 1 in 4 women under the age of 45 will have had an abortion in their lifetime. So and many will have come to Planned Parenthood.
You say that's 1 in 4?
1 in 4, right? 1 in 5 people has come to a Planned Parenthood. And so I think that most people do know what Planned Parenthood stands for. They do know it's the place where you go when you need to get something checked out. They do know it's the place you can go and get your birth control. They know it's the place where you can go to get abortion or get information if you need to get out of state. And so I think that, all of this other stuff is really a distraction because they're trying to, they don't like Planned Parenthood's power, right? They don't like the fact that we have 18 million supporters. It's like five times more than the NRA. They don't like the fact that, we can mobilize and show up and show out every single election cycle. And now, triple the force with Emily's List and NARAL, 3 organizations that have traditionally been led by white women now being led by Black women and people of color, right? That is power, and that is changing, and that's really what this is about. The attack is.
Do you ever worry, Alexis, people know you, but putting your face out there more, especially right now, because people are like, oh, Planned Parenthood is murdering all these Black people and this and that, they paint you as a face of evil almost?
I mean, no. I mean, I know what I stand for. My family, my mama knows what I stand for. And my kids know what I stand for. That's all that matters, honestly. No.
Cecile Richards was president before. Do you guys have a good relationship?
Yes, very, very well. Yeah.
We had her up here for her book, Make Trouble.
Yes. Yeah, no, she's still good people. She's still out there fighting in the streets.
We appreciate you guys for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alexis McGill Johnson, Laphonza, Butler, thank you.
And
again.
do we know the people we should be voting for in the midterms? Do we know the senators that are pro-life, just throughout the country?
How can people get that information? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to follow in structure here and name names.
Please.
There are senators who are running right now who have already declared that they are going to vote to abolish the filibuster to pass voting rights and reproductive rights, namely from the perspective of Emily's List. We are talking about leaders like Congresswoman Val Demings in Florida. We're talking about Chief Justice Sherry Beasley in North Carolina. I know there are other men who are also committed to that, who are running that Alexis and Planned Parenthood and NARAL have been working with. But our focus is on the women who are committed to being champions and leaders on behalf of women across this country.
Catherine Cortez Masto in Vegas, Reverend Warnock in Georgia. We need to get Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin. Who am I missing? Arizona, Mark Kelly. Oh, and John Fetterman in Pennsylvania.
Okay, well,
do you guys get death threats and things like that?
We have security.
I'm just wondering because
we got security.
We're seeing everything that's happened.
My man out there shaking his head yeah.
Mentally, that has to be draining when this is something that people are very passionate about. And there are some people out there. We saw somebody just break into Nancy Pelosi's house and attack her husband. Has there ever been major concerns?
I mean, it's real. I mean, I don't put on pink and run into the middle of an evangelical church. With my pom-poms. But we're cautious. We have folks who assess the scene. We know many of the faces because they've been the ones we have on camera because they're outside the clinics. To your point, and many. Fun fact. When January 6th happened, a lot of our security were able to identify specific people in the crowd because they had been the same people who were protesting outside of our clinics over the years. So, we keep a close eye.
And let's not forget Mark Reno.
Let's not. And I think, Angie, the point that you raise is a concern that I have in terms of the future of women running for office. Mm-hmm. The attacks that Speaker Pelosi's husband just faced, the dangerous nature now of just having a conversation and engaging in civic discourse, what does that mean for young people who we need to be future public servants, who we need to actually continue advancing democracy for generations to come? Are they going to be scared off from this and not be engaged in being champions and fighters for the future? I think that this is a real crisis, not only for our democracy in this moment, but for our country as a whole moving forward. Young people are not, we can't just see them as voters when it's election time. We have to see them as leaders all year long, and we have to see them as folks who are going to be the future leaders in these chambers of power and at these tables of power. And we've got to correct this moment so that we can ensure that they don't lose hope in their own leadership.
Absolutely. And Laphonza, we see what's happening with Twitter now. And so I know people are concerned about that, even being able to express yourself, but knowing that you can be bullied, harassed, threatened, and potentially, we don't know, what direction it's going in for real. But, those are real things because that's how you reach people with these social media platforms as well.
And every study that we have seen from Harvard to the Barbara Lee Foundation has said that misinformation and disinformation is disproportionately directed towards women and women of color who are running for office. And if we truly want a representative democracy, we've got to make sure that women and women of color in particular are elected in these halls of power so that our experiences can be a part of decision making. Ketanji Brown Jackson is I think a clear representation of that. How she is showing up in this conversation about affirmative action and the case that the court just took up. Her experience, her lived experience as a Black woman, may not change the outcome of the number of justices who vote, but I think there is a history and a record that is going to reflect what the lived experiences of Black women has been in the space of higher education and other arenas that would not be there but for her presence. And making sure that we continue to have that representative democracy at all levels of government and across those different chambers, I think is an incredibly important part of how we win the future.
I agree, but I would prefer for them to have more Senate seats so they can, expand the Supreme Court.
First bid is first.
And add 3 or 4 more Ketanji Brown.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
We are not limited to just one.
Word.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us again. We appreciate you guys, and you guys are welcome to come up here anytime you need to.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.